Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be painting an ultramarine from start to finish. But first of all I'd like to say a huge thank you to the guys over at Stronghold Games who sent me the miniature out. If you're ever in Hull, please go along and pop a visit into Stronghold Games. Better still, if you live there, visit regularly. Okay guys, so with this tutorial I've done ultramarines in the past, but I believe that I've refined the technique a little better in this video, and it's a bit different to my other ultramarine videos, so hopefully you pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. Okay, as always this is going to be a long video, so please go grab yourself a nice hot drink or maybe an ice cold beer and we'll get started with the tutorial. I start off by priming the miniature using Alclad 2's Lacquer Primer Black. It's very important to know that you need to be well ventilated and wearing a respirator if you're using this primer, and also you need to have a good quality airbrush with PTFE solvent proof seals. If your airbrush has rubber seals you cannot use this primer as it will damage your airbrush. If you can't use Alclad primers, then I highly recommend Badger Storm Res primers, which can be used in any airbrush. Here I'm priming the miniature about 20 psi and about 3 to 4 inches away from the miniature, just getting a nice smooth even coverage. I keep the airbrush moving so I don't build up paint in any one spot, and as you can see it gives nice flat smooth coverage really fast. We're going to base coat the miniature using Vallejo Game Air Magic Blue. It's very important to note that I'm going to be working super close to the miniature. We're going to be working probably half an inch away, maybe even less than that. And as you can see the needle's exposed here as I've took the needle cap off, and I'm only working on the extreme centre of all the panels, and I'm leaving the black behind in the recesses. I'm working at about 15 psi here. I dropped it down because I'm working so close to the miniature, and I'm ever so slightly pulling back on the trigger of my airbrush. I'm using a 0.35 Iwata Eclipse airbrush here, and as you can see even with a 0.35mm needle nozzle set on the airbrush I'm still able to get really accurate with the airbrush. Now we're going to use Vallejo Game Air Electric Blue, and I'm going to add this as a highlight colour to the very centre of all the panels and areas where I think a natural highlight would look good. Again, I'm working really close to the model and I'm just pulling a tiny amount back on the airbrush trigger, as you can see. Now we're going to use Games Workshop's contrast paint Talosar Blue, and we're going to use it as a glaze. So what I do is I thin it down in a little thimble and I add water to it about 1:1, and as you can see here I'm just placing it down really thinly on the miniature. What this is going to do, it's going to blur the transition lines of where we've airbrushed the two different blue colours, and it's also going to leave a nice finish on top of the paint that we've already painted. Now we're going to do a technique known as hard edge highlighting. We're going to use Vallejo Game Air Wolf Grey. As you can see here, I'm rolling the bristles of the brush into a nice sharp point onto my fingers so I can get some really nice crisp lines. I don't use the front of the brush bristles, I use the side of the brush, and I use the natural angle of the miniature to catch the edge. If you do this, you'll get nicer, smoother, straight lines. And here you can see what the miniature looks like after applying the hard edge highlights. If you actually take your time, you can get even better results than I've got, and it really helps the miniature to pop. Now we're going to paint all the metallics on the miniature using Vallejo Metal Colour Gunmetal Grey. This is one of my favourite metallics, and as you can see it goes on the miniature in pretty much one coat. It's very thin when applied, and don't let the fact that it says it's an airbrush colour fool you. It can be hand brush painted very well also. The parts that are due to be painted in gold are getting a base coat of Vallejo Metal Colour Copper. I don't show it on camera, but after the Vallejo Metal Colour Copper are dried, I then wash it with Agrax Earthshade. I then come in with Vallejo Metal Colour Gold and highlight all of the areas that were painted in copper. Now we're going to be painting the flesh of the Space Marine. It's important to note that we're going to be very heavily thinning this paint. We're using Vallejo Model Colour Light Flesh, and I thin it 1:1 with water, so that's 1 drop of water to 1 drop of paint. It's very important to actually apply the flesh paint to the miniature really thin. The reason we do this is we want to not obscure any of that beautiful detail, and we want to get a nice solid smooth coverage on the miniature. I do this in about 3 to 4 layers and let each layer thoroughly dry before applying the next layer until I get a solid, even, smooth coverage. We're going to be applying the Army Painter's Flesh Wash. Here you'll see that I apply the flesh wash and let it pool in all of the recesses, picking out all of the details. I don't show it on camera, but after letting the flesh wash dry, I come back in with that original light flesh paint from Vallejo Model Colour, and I highlight all of the extreme top surfaces of the face. The base on this miniature has what looks like an area of toxic waste or puddles of toxic waste cut into the recess of the base, and I'm using this fantastic contrast paint here that's going to really make it look like toxic waste is spilling out from the pipe. This is really simple to do. I don't recommend letting contrast paints pool, but in this instance, because of how the details are set on the miniature, I don't worry about letting the contrast paint pool at all. After allowing that to dry, I come in with ENML Binders 2.0 Gloss, and we're going to make that dirty looking sewage look really glossy and wet. There's a few things I forgot to paint on camera when doing this miniature. One of them was the purity seals. The purity seal was just painted in Games Workshop's Mephiston Red. The parchment part of the purity seal was painted using Sandry Dust. Then I washed over all of the purity seal, including the red, with Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia. Okay guys, if you've managed to sit through this video, through all the snoring of Chax and my next door neighbour deciding to drill at stupid o'clock in the morning, congratulations. And I just want to say a huge thank you to the guys over at Stronghold Games in Hull who sent me the miniature out for review. And lastly, I want to say a thank you to you guys for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. And I'll catch you in the next one.